So welcome to another video from theplayersaid.com. My name's Alexander, and we are here today at WBC 2022. It's just me on my own, Grant's in the back, talking with some people, but I've been able to carve out a little bit of time. Thank you for taking some time with me. This is Ben Hull, who is the designer of a number of different games. Maybe my favorite, at least, is Fields of Fire.
Oh, well, thank you.
Maybe the most popular. I don't know if that's
probably
true.
Over the years in sales, it's pretty good. We've done really well with Fields of Fire. So yeah, actually the second edition just sold out.
Awesome. And so I wanted to kind of a chat, pick your brain about some of the things we've got going on, some of it outside of Fields of Fire, which we've got here. And I remember we sat down in 2019 and you'd showed me, I think, an even earlier prototype of this.
Yes.
So this is bayonet and musket, and that's a new system, is that correct?
Yes. So we took the musket and pike system and evolved it to the next era, right? So there was a challenge. Things changed. The armies got much larger, and basically, if we talk about like theory of victory, how did you win on the battlefield changed because of the larger armies. Their ability to command and control a large army didn't evolve at the same rate as the size of the army. To make it work, we had to really look at the musket pike system, where we had a lot of detail at the battalion level. That wouldn't scale unless you have like 24 hours of play time, and I think the players will probably tap out. So we streamlined the combat system significantly. That way it still takes about the same amount of time to fight a battle. So we kind of got down to how many dice rolls, how many shits, and kind of did a little bit of analysis of how do we make it work and still have a period feel, right? And so that's the key is you can make a chart and roll dice against a chart, but does it feel like that era?
Right.
Whatever feel like that era. We don't force you to wear a big wig, but the wigs were pretty awesome.
Although you could, and that'd be great.
Yeah, the big long brown wigs. We were still at the long curly brown wigs at this point. And so the era is fairly obscure to a lot of Americans because it doesn't get a lot of coverage in American history.
Right.
So we were off kind of doing our own thing. We did refer to those as King William's War and Queen Anne's War, and there was action that did take place in North America during them, but it was fairly like baby version of the French and Indian War. But it was a big deal in Europe.
Yes.
And they were very large struggles, primarily in Flanders, the cockpit of Europe. They're duking it out. It's one of the last times that the king of a sovereign country was, in England. And last time King William, he was the last of the kings to actually lead his army on the field. And so we've got the first volume of this is Blenheim in 1704. Of course, that's probably the most famous of the era. Had to do that one with Marlborough. But we wanted to balance the scales. So if you just hit Marlborough, you kind of get a skewed view of like, oh, well, the British are running circles around everybody. What about the French? Well, the French were no mean trick, right? So we wanted to balance it out because the 9 Years' War, the French did much better. And they had their own super duper Duke of Luxembourg. So we're kind of contrasting them in the first volume and the second volume. So we have Blenheim and Neerwinden in 1693, and that was Neerwinden was the Duke of Luxembourg's big victory there. And today we're playtesting. We've gone all the way through playtesting volume 2, which will be Ramillies and Steenkirk. So again, we'll have Marlborough winning his big victory in 1706 and Luxembourg in 1692, big victory. And then it looks like volume 3 will probably hit the last two Marlborough, which Oudenarde, which we have here, and Malplaquet. Oudenarde is kind of a counter battle, so it develops differently than, hey, let's all set up in big line and bash and crash. Malplaquet is a let's all line up and smash each other in the face, but it was the largest battle in Europe for 100 years. So that'll be fairly dense, and we may end up with a map and a half, maybe 2 maps, because it just to fit that many guys on there. Because you have like at Neerwinden, the French had maybe around 80,000 men, and the Allies had 65,000 men. That's a big battle.
Yes, that's a lot.
And it crammed in about a 3-mile frontage. And just the theory of victory is critical, and that's the big change from musket and pike to bayonet and musket. So one of the things we did is, because the action on the map can be fairly dense, we moved all the command stuff from the map over to a command display, which we have here, and then I have some examples from the other battles. And so in the command display, we use the leaders and the brigades to do the command and control system, and then all the tactical action of combat happens on the map. So in the command display, the critical factor is, can I shift units between the wings faster than my opponent and develop critical mass to effect a breakthrough? Whereas in musket and pike, the wings are fixed.
Yes.
There is no battle where somebody picks up some troops from one wing and moves it to another. It just didn't happen. They didn't train that way. They didn't think that way. And so in this period, that was the critical factor, is the ability to move troops left and right and from reserve across. So like at Ramilly, the key, the decisive move was Marlborough moved cavalry from his far right-hand side all the way to his left, and was able to put in that attack to then win the day. So that you couldn't do in musket and pike. But in this one, you can do that, and it does highlight the abilities of the leaders to move the brigades here, and then they shift their relative position on the map accordingly.
So in musket and pike, you have your different formations, and those are issued individual orders. Mm-hmm. We have that same kind of a system here, even at that larger scale?
Yes, so the orders do happen at the brigade level. So within the zones on the command display, the individual brigades get an order. And so it's a little simplified. They only have 3. There's a charge order, a march order for which there's no marker, and then a dress ranks. So it's like it's an attack, move, and fix what went wrong. And so, and then when units are eliminated, there's no rubber routers. They are replaced with a routed unit marker that lasts 2 turns, and then it runs away and makes trouble as it runs away. And so that you'll notice that, like, when a big battle happens, you'll see all these routed markers go away, and you're like, where did everybody go? Well, they all went. They're done. They headed for the hills, and so. So you do end up with a little bit of a traffic management. You say, oh, well, this is why they left lanes for the guys to run away on, because if I just line up in a solid line, they're going to punch holes through my line trying to run away.
And that's one of the hallmarks of the musket and pike series, is you got all those cav on the wings, and you got to spread them out.
Yep.
Because otherwise you can't just throw everyone in.
You're right.
You just didn't do that.
And it's funny. So. And a lot of how that works is based on the research, right? So we have a movie vision of it, or some kind of a general narrative. Oh, this wing launched an attack, and so people just kind of assume that it was, oh, well, the front line launched this one massive attack. It's like, well, no. Once we actually started, peeling the onion on they kind of echelon the attacks, and even within the regiment and the squadron. The lines of the horses echelon attack. These large formations would move fairly close, and then these lines would then articulate. And if you think of it, like in the Roman Legion, you had this maniple, the 2 front ranks that would work in this system. The cavalry did the same thing, and it got a lot more detailed. And we want to capture a feel of that. We didn't want to get into management because the local guys knew what they were doing, right?
Yes.
So there's a lot less statuses on this one because it's much larger. So in this case, the infantry, they take casualties, and cavalry just takes disorder. So a cavalry unit, which is generally a regiment, is 2 or 3 squadrons of cavalry. They attack and defend, and then their result is they are flipped to a disordered, and then a second disorder, they're routed, right? And then they're off the map. And so that's pretty straightforward, keeps it clean, just one status. You flip it gets rid of a lot of markers, because so musket and pike was marker intensive, guilty as charged, but the density was much less. You generally have maybe 25 to 35 units on
a bit more spread out at times.
And so you don't get this giant scrum in the middle of the map. So I felt like I could get away with it for the feel of the era. This one, there's going to be a scrum, so I want to keep the stacks low, keep it simple. In the infantry, they take casualties, they flip over, and then based on their number, they can take up to two more casualties, and then they're routed. And then we have a first fire mechanic. So the loading the musket is difficult, right?
Yes.
and ensuring that they were very conscious that the musket that was loaded before combat, that volley was your main volley.
That had to be it, yeah.
And they jealously guarded that first fire. So that is an automatic feature. When they come up so on its front side, it still has its first fire. Once it fires, that's gone, and it can't ever heal back. Now, I can take additional casualties, and I can reform from line closers, but I can't ever go back to my front side. I've lost my first fire. And the first fire automatically dings the other guy.
Okay.
And so when you come together, if two fresh battalions come together, they first fire and they ding each other kind of automatically. But then the real key is, do I have another fresh battalion that still has its first fire? And that's a decisive advantage, and that's something they really look for. And so that also, the ground scale is a lot bigger here. So there's, you can move right up to each other, and you have to be under attack order to actually attack, because you can stand there, because in reality you're still 200 yards away.
Yes.
So the ground scale is twice as big. So we've gone to, depending on the battle, it varies a little bit to fit it into the map, but it's generally about 200 to 220 yards or ish meters, depending on whose map we built it from. So the ground scale is a good bit bigger. Still, we do allow stacking, but you can only stack 2. So it keeps it low, and there's not a lot of status markers. So that keeps, even though I do have tweezers, there's less. A stack of 10 might be a stack of 4 at most, right?
Which is fine.
Yeah.
So loosely, do we have kind of an approximate time of when this might be ready for getting into people's hands?
Oh, well, that is a great question. So the first volume is through art. So the maps are done, the counters are done, and the charts are done. We're just doing the layout on the rule books and the playbooks. So that's and that's not even the hard part, right? The layout, then we just go through the editing, make sure that the layout was right, make sure the artwork gets changed from my playtest artwork. And then Charlie Kibler's doing that. He's very good at it.
Yes.
He did the musket pike stuff, which was with the dual pack reprint.
Yes, and I love the new artwork on the counters of those.
Yes, and Charlie did that.
I know there's the old orthodox old ones. I like the new style with the kind of the 30 years war look at them. I just love it. I think it looks great.
I thought they came out really nice. And keep in mind, the original This Cursed Civil War was 21 years ago when it came out, which makes me feel old and sad. But it was a product of its time. Now the game system is still the game system, but I felt like it was a good time to kind of step up the game in the art.
Give it a facelift.
Right? Yeah, give it a facelift. Have it stand on its own. And I think when it's all said and done, the artwork came out really nice. And it's a good contrast on the map. When you lay it on the map, you really do get that engraving feel.
I agree.
Yeah, and so, well, thank you. I know several people were nervous.
Well, if it's been around for 20 years, they're very used to it, very comfortable with it. I totally understand why people would be very orthodox about it too.
So I don't have a problem with sprites or icons, but I really do like the formations. We have a new artist for this one. New to me. He's done some other work for GMT, Darius, and he's a Polish artist who does some fantastic artwork. So for this one, we do have a kind of an overhead artwork, but we capture the coat colors and stuff, which is a big deal at this point. 30 Years War, it was like, sometimes you have a coat color, mostly brown, some red, a little bit of here and there, but it's a big deal here. You know,
Yes.
we get national armies, and the coat colors is a big deal. I did kind of draw the line at cuffs. I'm like, I'm not doing the cuffs, man. I'm not doing it.
Yes.
I'll get the color right, but there's 50 million.
That's good. It's good enough at the scale. Yes.
You'll get the coat color. I'm not really going to sweat the cuffs where you can't see them in the counter. So, but I will sweat, and I have gutted through piles and piles of stuff to try to get the coat colors right, because I know it's important to a lot of guys. And
Yeah.
some miniatures guy will poke you in the eye if you don't get it right.
Oh yeah. Yes.
And that's all right, and that would be my own fault for failure of research.
So is this probably a 2023?
Yeah, well, probably early part of next year, because it's gone, like I said, at the final parts of art, and so really the metering the production is kind of the biggest GMT piece of it. Is, hey, we got to meter the production,
right?
So to keep the office folks busy at the right rate instead of crushing them all at once.
Yes.
So they do have to pack it and ship it. So, I'd say early 2023, we'll see Volume 1 hit the street, and probably right around there is when we put Volume 2 up. Assuming nobody hates it, or not insufficient number of people hate it.
Yes. So changing tack a little bit, I also saw on the other table we've got the Ardennes Battle of the Bulge expansion for Fields of Fire. And is that a production copy of it?
That is the production copy. So it is shipping here very shortly.
Very shortly. That's awesome. And it looks great, just like you would expect it to.
Yeah, it came out nicely. The cars are right nice. Little things, which I love to point out. So, like the church card in the graveyard, that's the actual church from from that village where the missions take place. It was Rokarat. Much of the action takes place in the northern edge of the Battle of the Bulge at the twin villages of Rokarat and Krinkel. And so the villages are really like one kind of long village, and apparently, probably generations back they hated each other and said, I'm not going to call
the
it.
locals. It's two different villages.
It's two different villages, but it's one urban strip, and right in the middle between them is that church. And the church ended up being, as it often plays, is a critical point in the battlefield, and the associated graveyard is there. Those are actual photographs from the real ones. So that was a lot of fun doing.
And that's an expansion to Volume 1 of Fields of Fire.
Yeah, so you have to have Volume 1 to play it, because you'll need all the Americans. So we added some additional German units and some specific bits that are necessary for those. So you've got some anti-tank mines for the Americans and some Bangalore torpedoes. So they need those for certain parts of the mission. They actually got several extra bazookas, so we kind of introduced, hey, sometimes you get extra over what you normally have, because that came in real important.
Yes.
And there was a kind of a little history bit that I thought was kind of fascinating. The tank destroyer battalions, which were this how the Army at the time dealt with enemy tanks, in addition to the actual cannons or tank, self-propelled tank destroyers, they actually had bunches of extra bazookas and anti-tank mines that they could drive up and say, here, and hand them out to the regular infantry so that they could beef up their own anti-tank defense, which was critical. That's a good one. That's ready to ship here very shortly.
Yes. So I'm very excited to dive into that as well. And then I saw also a prototype for an upcoming Fields of Fire game.
So in the Fields of Fire universe, we have several things in the works. I've been doing a fair amount of reading about World War I, and there is, so I went ahead and building out the prototype for 1917, 1918, because that's when the modern version of the rifle company was invented, and so. Earlier in World War I, they still had a much boxier style that was twice as big and twice as hard to command, which is why they quit doing it. Right.
Yes.
It wasn't just because everybody got killed. It was just like, this is too unwieldy. And so they went to the very triangular structure that we know and love in Fields of Fire moving forward. But that genesis was 1718. I looked at several different actions, primarily with the Commonwealth, but because the Americans were kind of late to the game, we did find we still actually retained some of the older style of the units, which. But we learned rapidly, and we actually, so a lot of the modern U.S. Army changed right after World War I. They kind of adopted the triangular style at the very end and said, yeah, actually, it turns out those French and English had some
kind of works.
learned a thing or two, and so they ended up kind of adapting that. So I was looking at some Commonwealth units because they really did a lot of innovation, and I'll probably end up weaving in some French because the French, they don't get a lot of love, but they really were
Agreed.
Innovators on the battlefield as well.
So with the actions that you've got so far in there, are there any battles that people would know that are kind of going to be in there?
So mostly looking at I guess Third Ypres, and then there's the 1918 back and forth. So I'd like to do like Villers-Bretonneux, because the Australians. There's a book about it that's really good. Peter Fitzsimon's book on Villers-Bretonneux is fantastic, and it makes you want to go down under. Right? I love you guys. Yes. You guys are great. And he was unabashedly an Australian patriot, right? He said, hey, the kids don't know what your grandfathers did, so he really went all in on that. But the story's fascinating. The Germans advanced. They were literally just within miles of getting their eyes on Amiens, which would have been devastating. And so they threw the Australians in a desperate counterattack to restore the front and then roll them back. So that's really kind of the couple I'm looking at. I read a couple books on Ypres and Flanders battlefield that are interesting, that aren't horribly depressing, but sufficiently so. Yeah. If you're going to do World War I, I went ahead and developed some rules for more involved trench systems and dugouts and how that sort of works. Weaving in how the what they call the hurricane-style bombardment that the Germans developed towards the end. It says we don't need to bomb them for 6 days or even 6 hours.
Yes.
15 minutes of intense from the 5.9s, which were the heavy German field piece, and you could literally destroy the entrenchment and walk through. And so they got good at it, right? And the Allies followed. They're like, oh, well, they're onto something. I don't have to necessarily shell it for 6 hours. But if they picked a spot on the map, they could churn it into mud.
Yep.
And then you kind of walk through. So got some of that, but there's also more open maneuver opportunities as once the Allies kind of got the offensive going along in the 100 days battle and the Battle of Amiens, where they just rolled back the Germans. It's like almost 40, 50 miles. It's like the biggest advance they made in the whole war.
Yes.
And that's when the Germans threw in the towel. They're like, all right, we're done, because they're about to invade Germany. And so it was funny. I was inspired because when I was a young officer, we had this book we had to read in the infantry officer course called Infantry in Battle, and all it was vignettes from World War I. And I'm like sitting there going, why am I studying? Why did they hand me a book about World War I? Well, it was filled with incredible detail about the various actions and tactics, which really blows up the whole, trope about the blundering fools of World War I, just over the top. No, they put a lot of thought. They tried everything. The technology was just kicking their butt.
Yes.
It was just an inflection point of technology outrunning our ability to figure it out. And then once they finally figured it out, we got World War II. But like James Holland and his book, he points out that in critical campaigns in Normandy, the casualty rate was greater than at the Somme for the units, but
there were fewer of them.
There were fewer of them, and then you would get a breakthrough, and then you felt like it was worth it, because then you had the ability to then exploit once you did pay that awful price. But I've got that one on Fields of Fire, but there's a bunch of others queued up, which I don't have here. So I have a Tarawa Saipan campaign for 2nd Marine Division, so we get our Volume 2 stuff. And I also have a campaign in Vietnam for 1st Marine Division I have that one because I knew some guys who fought there, and so it kind of had a personal pull on me, and got to meet one of the battalion commanders after he retired. So I was very interested in the subject, and Vietnam was a difficult one to build a campaign around there because generally you didn't see that much action over a sustained period. So that one looks in 1967, southwest of Da Nang is a place called the Cuisine Valley. So the Cuisine Valley is a large rice-producing region. The North Vietnamese went all in on trying to control it, and we spent like 6 months fighting over that valley of a pretty intense infantry action, and knocked the second division of the North Vietnamese Army out of action for several months. So it was a hard-won victory. It involves attacking, defending. It includes even a night helicopter assault, which was very unusual.
Is that going to feature in the game?
Yeah, so I'm trying to work that in there. So you have to,
that'll be something different.
Yeah, you'll be flying in the CH-53s at night with a bunch of Marines. They're like, I can't see anything. They didn't all have NVGs back then.
No.
It was like, it's dark. So it was. Very briefly, a large formation got pinned down from a significant Vietnamese force. As it got dark, they flew in 2 companies behind the North Vietnamese, and it was a mess. Trying to get sorted with the helicopters at night. It's like, the attack didn't put in properly, but it was good enough that the North Vietnamese were like, oh crap, they're behind us.
Yes.
And they decamped their fortifications, and then once they got out of their fortifications, started moving, then we were able to lay it on and really get them good. And so there's a lot more information about the enemy order battle nowadays than there was several years ago, so we have pretty good information of who was where, and because the North Vietnamese are now just the Vietnamese.
Yes.
They have opened up a lot of archives and interviews to really give us a much deeper perspective of what was going on. There's a lot of literature when I was younger that a lot of people are familiar with. It's very one-sided because that's what we had.
Yeah.
Right? And but once you have the fuller picture, you actually say, oh, well, this is what they were trying to do. This is how relative, success or not success versus ours. And so a lot of times we were like ships passing the night. They were working on completely different. We had totally misread them. They totally misread us, and trying to figure, but we were duking it out in the middle. But it does add a much better perspective, right? It's a classic, good history needs time to gain perspective.
Yes, I couldn't agree more.
So, I've got some of those. We have Colin Parsons, who is from the UK. He's a veteran of the British Army, and he's working as part of the larger team that's working the 3rd edition. So he's got some Commonwealth stuff working up. So the parachute regiment might get their. I've seen his test campaign for Long Tan for the Australians, but he's got Sangan for in Operic for the UK fellows with the parachute regiment there in Afghanistan, and Goose Green. And I was like, well, if you're going to have the parachute, you're going to have to do Arnhem. I mean, you're going to have to do Arnhem. And Arnhem lends itself well. We have the Way City stuff, so we can do a more dense urban.
Yes.
And we know exactly the laydown of the buildings. What buildings were where, how big were they. And so you can really do a historical Fields of Fire version of the map, the digitized map in a pretty good representation. And I think you'll get a pretty good simulation of what the parachute regiment went through there. So I'm excited about that one. Stuff like Afghanistan, stuff's too close to, I have to stay outside the 25-year window because I have an NDA and I work for the Department of Defense. Yeah.
Right.
So I will, if other folks
if they're doing British Paras, you tell them to do Falklands as well.
So
get them on that.
Get your Falklands, Afghanistan, and if you get Arnhem in the box, you're gonna hit a home run on that one.
Yes, agree.
Because Johnny Frost was a heck of a soldier. So there's all kinds of plans, and so The exciting bit is, they've got a big crew working on it, a lot of fans of the game. So it's not a one-man show. I'm not in my basement.
I mean, you are, but there's other people doing it too.
Yes, true. I am in my, but I do several things. So that allows me to kind of focus on kind of research, fleshing out the campaign. I do one of the things that we did in the Bulge thing is kind of we've experimented over Fields of Fire. How do I get the mission and the campaign booklet right? And so you'll notice it's very different from Volume 1, Volume 2, and it's all the same information. How do you organize it, right? How do you organize it, make it easy to use? And so I think that's evolved in a very positive way. So like the update kit, you'll get all of the campaigns, but we just updated it into the new format, so there's less flipping. It's all right there, and hopefully we'll answer more questions that people have that we've answered over the years. It's like, well, what do you mean by this? Well, that's a great question.
Yes, we'll centralize it right here.
We'll just put it in the booklet. So that the style of the booklet for the mission booklet is we kind of adopted that as the style. And so we're retrofitting it as well as moving it in the future stuff. So, because I came up with it, but I handed it off to them to say, hey, well, tweak it, knock it out. I have gotten all questions for the last. So the original one came out in 2008. So it has been 13 years of answering questions. So I do remember, and so all your input helps. And the beauty is we have a lot of fans so now we can do kind of much broader play testing. So we can do initial design play testing and then blind play testing. Here we think it's done. Do you think it's done?
Yes.
Because that's a challenge we have in a lot, not just Fields of Fire, but any of the games. Is a lot of the play testers are involved early on, and it's very difficult to do a new batch. That's totally
getting the blind stuff, people to dive into a new system can be challenging to convince people to do it.
Yeah, and I think that was the biggest challenge with Volume 2 is Volume 2 was really built by a large playtest team that had played Volume 1 extensively, and it was really an extension. So if people started in Volume 2, that was hard. Admittedly, it's hard because Volume 1 kind of automatically had a programmed instruction built into it. It just by the way technology advanced and the way the campaign went, it gently rolled you in. So by the time you got to Vietnam and helicopters, you were already like a savant, right?
Yes.
And then you roll into Volume 2, and then it keeps extending in relative complexity. And so that was a challenge for folks that would say, well, it's a standalone game. Yes, it is standalone. You don't need anything in the other one to play it, but it starts, mission 1 is a hard one right off the bat, which is, I'm doing an amphibious assault.
Yes.
I have to then realize how to distribute my troops, how to get them ashore, and then versus the other one where I just walk up and go, hey, let's go, follow me. It's somewhat more, it's easy. We just walk onto the map. And it's like, well, yeah, that is much easier. So we have a player's guide that'll have some training missions, so people who don't have Volume 1, you get the player guide or you get the update guide, and some of these things will be free downloadable as well once all the layout's done. One of my things, I'm not going to sell you something to play just to learn how to play something you've already bought.
Yes. Yes.
But we will sell products that extend or make it better or whatever. So we got some different player aids. Over time, people say, hey, if we reorganize the data like this, it works better. I'm like, all right, yeah, I'm totally cool with that.
Yes.
I am completely open to ideas. We had a lot of people generating their own content, and we're trying to give it a fair shake to look at what's good, what's bad, what's helpful, and a lot of that. It isn't just me. What do you all think? And give it to Jason Carr and the larger playtest team. And kudos to GMT for trying to up the game on the development playtest team by creating kind of this core playtest engine, which I think the hobby needs and the game's needed if we're going to up the quality of the game. Because the demand is there, obviously. But all of us in the design side of it. I have a day job.
We wish we could do it all day long, but it's
yeah.
just not feasible.
Yeah. So I will eventually retire, but I probably have another good 6 years in me before I toss in the towel and be able to do this full time. But the beauty of the hobby is we all get together and help each other out, share information,
Yes.
stuff. The videos, the podcasts, generating player content that they share with other. That's all great. Keep it coming. It helps each other out. In other games I go on BGG and go,
Yep.
and I look at the floor. I got a question about this. Are you sure? That's all part of the beauty of the hobby.
I agree. And I think people's love of the hobby is what drives that, because we want to share it. We want it to be as good as we can.
Yes.
But I appreciate you taking some time to sit down with me
Hey,
and
you're
talk through
welcome.
these upcoming games that we've got. So thank you very much for joining me. Thank you everyone for tuning in. I've been
you.
Alexander for theplayersaid.com.